If you're like me and sometimes wish you'd have been around during the early 1900s, then you'll be so glad you stuck around for more Explore Tulsa.
Well, that was a time that Henry Ford started to roll out his first Model Ts out of the factory and into the showroom floor with a sticker price of only $950.
Plus, as his team continued to make innovations to reduce production costs, he passed the savings on to the consumer. And at one time, the Model T was selling for as little as $280 a car.
Lucky for us, Mike Fuller has a love for the Model T and many other autos from the past, and you'll find them all at his museum in Inola.
Ever since I was a little kid, I loved and enjoyed old cars. I could tell you every make and model when I was a young kid. The first car I owned was a 1931 Model A Ford Coupe. I drove it through high school, and everybody knew me. I had a real good friend named Jerry McLean, and we went just about everywhere in that car when we was in high school. And after that, I got a 57 Dodge two-door hardtop Cornet. Still had the Ford. Wished I had the Dodge. My dad was a Dodge guy. He loved Dodges. So our family mainly had Dodge and Chrysler products. He actually found that Model A and took me over and showed it to me. When I got out of the Army in '73, I really didn't have no intentions of picking up this many cars, but when I got out of the Army, I bought a 1923 Model T Roadster. A year or two later, I picked up another one, and it seemed like about every year or two I was picking up cars and ended up with 50 cars at one time. And they all ranged from 1917 up to 1976. Well, it just gets back to I've always loved old cars. I always enjoyed looking at those cars, but my dad talked about them a lot when I was a kid. He always talked about the T's and the Model A's. On these old cars, you kind of get into the era that you enjoy, and the older cars I always enjoyed, but the newer cars that I got that 48 Chrysler there. Now you can get out and drive that car, and it's smooth. It just floats down the highway. It's very fun to drive, very enjoyable to drive. The 48 Chrysler, the one I have, it has a 6-cylinder motor. Now I also have 48 Chrysler at home, it's got a straight 8 motor. But if I ever get this 31 Chrysler convertible finished, now that will be my favorite car. It's rare, there are very few of them out there, and it's a beautiful car. There's 150 gas globes in here, and they're all original except for about 10. Them globes, they probably date back to the 20s, or late 20s, I would say. And they ran them globes up to the early 60s. And the early globes would have had a glass body. Now the lenses is all glass, but the early globes would have had a glass body or even solid glass. And then later on, 50s and 60s, they started putting a plastic body around the globes, and they still use the glass lenses. You know, I ended up with all this stuff, and I've always enjoyed people coming in and looking at it, so I always kept the doors open. I really didn't have it as a museum. But as people come in through the years, they started calling it a museum. So I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, that's when I finally started calling it a museum. When I travel around on my Harley to different towns, I always try to stop at little museums and stuff. And I got to thinking, shoot, they're right. I've got about as much stuff, if not more, than a lot of museums have got. So it's basically a museum, gas auto museum. What's interesting is how many people will say, well, my dad had a car like that, or my grandpa had a car like that. and then they start telling stories. So I'll listen to more stories than probably I'll tell.